So go ahead and grab yourself a cup of coffee or tea or soda or whatever, and I'll meet you back here in 15. I just noticed that my Trip Around the World quilt comes up like every 2 or 3 quilts rather than all the rest of them. It's all supposed to be random, which is just kind of weird. Sorry, random thought. We'll start in about 5 minutes. Hi everybody, welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. My name's Maria, and I am here to help you make more quilts in less time with a lot less stress. So, this has been a weird couple of weeks at the Spatelnik house. Of the 14 days that it's been since I was last here with you, I spent 11 of them sick as a dog. So, I didn't accomplish a whole lot. I'm going to show you what I did get done, and I'm going to talk to you about some other things that I haven't shown you before, like the quilt behind me. This is not one that I did, but there's a story that comes with it, so I'll be sharing that. But our tip for this session, if this is your first time here, we always start with an organizational tip, then I update you on various quilts, and then it can be kind of a who knows what towards the end. I try to do a bunch of different stuff. But our tip for this time is we've talked about going through your projects in progress on a regular basis to see if you still want to keep doing them. That hasn't changed. But one thing I'd like you to consider is if you do the project, where is it going to go? Now, I don't just mean in your home, but who are you giving it to? Are you giving it to someone for Christmas? And so maybe now's the time to be working on it so it can be done and quilted and bound and everything before you give it to them. Is it for an upcoming wedding, which might have a sooner deadline? Who is it going to and what deadlines apply? Now, some things there may not be a deadline. It might be a Christmas present, but you don't care if they get it this year or next year or the year after. That's fine, as long as you know where it's going. What I see happen a lot is as quilters, we love to try new things and try new patterns. And so we make these quilts that don't have a home. And that means that they sit in a closet somewhere. I have a linen closet where I have some older quilts that don't get seen anymore. I will occasionally bring some out, but I make a lot more quilts than I have room to display or anything. So 99% of the time, if I'm making a quilt, I know where it's going. If it's going to go to charity because I just want to practice a technique or play with some different colors or do something strange, and strange is a definition of quilt at my house, as those of you who've been around for a bit know. If it's going to go to charity, I make sure that it's going to be made in a size that the charity can use. So for example, if it's for a homeless shelter, and they need twin-size bed quilts, giving them a wall hanging doesn't do any good. Okay? So that's one of the things that I keep in mind is where's its final destination? And so that way I know that it's going to be used and appreciated where it's going. Okay? Now, does that mean that I might make a bigger quilt than I had intended? Sure. Does it mean I might make a smaller quilt than I intended? Yeah, that can also happen. And might its recipient change if I hate what I'm doing? Oh yes, that's been known to happen. There have been some quilts that I have made for a particular adult that was going to be bed-sized that wound up being a crib quilt. But it still had the sizes that were necessary. It was made in an appropriate way for the final recipient in terms of the denseness of the quilting, the pre-washing, or whatever needed to happen, so that it's going to have an appreciative recipient at the end. So that's just a thought for me, that if you wanted to maybe add that to your tracker, that this is where it's going, and maybe a projected due date. You know, maybe you can give yourself a due date for something, so it's not 5 Christmases from now that gift gets given. Okay, so I wanted to update you on some quilts. So let me switch camera views here. So the last time I had not quite finished the binding on StashBlaster 2A, which is what this one is, but it's now completely finished and I think it came out good. I'm still considering what I want to put in these squares later. I'm thinking a 3-flower arrangement in the large triangles and then some small flowers down the center spike here, but may or may not happen. I did have this pointed out to me that someone told me that they really like the fact that the center spike here, as it goes through, creates an additional diagonal all the way down through the quilt. And so they thought that was kind of neat. So when you're laying out your blocks, look for those secondary designs. Let me pull this down. I just have to find the pins because I was putting it on top of the hexagon quilt. I couldn't just stick it like I can normally. The hexagons are done. The quilt top is complete. All of the rows have been joined. At this point, I am just going to be figuring out my quilting pattern. And I've pretty much decided that what I want to do is do water ripples through the blue and have them go around the fish and then do the scales on the fish. But I have to quilt it first before I can put on the eyes or any buttons or things like that. And then the fish themselves, I'm thinking little tiny scales. So that'll take a little bit of time. And I'll have to find the appropriate colored threads because I wouldn't want to put, red on this one. I'm going to want something that's going to blend in with each fish, but be enough different that the scales are more visible. So it looks like you've got depth there. So that's done, but I looked it up. From the time I took the class that I learned about flat back piecing, because I had always used the whip stitch method before, it was 51 weeks by the time I had taken the class, designed the quilt, covered the hexagons, made the quilt. So the top was done in just under a year of when I took the original class. And it took me over a month to get the design down. So I'm pretty happy with how long it took, given I couldn't devote a ton of time to it. I only told myself to do 15 inches worth of sewing, which is 15 sides of hexagons, on a day. And when I was done with that, I was done for the day unless I had more time. And I averaged significantly higher than that because there's over 1,500 pieces there. So I'm quite pleased with how quickly it went together, and looking forward to getting it basted and start quilting it. I'm going to be machine quilting this, which means it's not going to be as neat as if I hand quilted it, but it'll be done a whole lot sooner. So that's what's going on with that one. Now this one has its own story. Actually, no, that's not that. Let's finish the quilt update first. The charm quilt, the basting is on the front, and I am putting it on the back now. I did have someone email me and ask me what I meant by I basted down the binding. So I'm going to switch cameras here. Now the back binding here is thicker than the front. Okay, so there's a front and here's the back. So I stitched right in the ditch here, just a simple hand stitch with really cruddy fabric. I mean with cruddy thread, because I don't care if it's not strong enough to hold the quilt together. It's only going to be in while I'm putting the binding on. So the nice thing about this is instead of using any pins or using adhesive or anything like that, and I don't know why that's flexing like that. I'm not moving. Let's see if I get it to focus down. No, it's getting weird. Okay, let me see. Let me try one other thing here. Maybe if I get in close enough. It may be this, yeah, it's probably this background being so snake-like. So on this side, what I can do is I can go ahead and get these miters into place and get them locked down. And I'm not going to get poked by pins as I'm trying to get myself into these tight corners. And I can put this in a bag and carry it around and not have any issues with that. I will say that when I started this, I started back here and I worked my way into the corner so that when I'm doing that last little bit that can be a little tight, I'm not going to be wedging myself into a corner. So this will finish right here. So this is all basted down, and I can take this anywhere and do anything with it, and nobody's going to get poked. No pins will fall out. So that's why I did it this way. Okay? Just so that you're aware, since these corners are not your standard corners, I did have to, when I went around these corners, I had to use some different techniques so that they would come out clean. They're not going to be perfect. My interior corner here I'm not super happy with. because it rounded out more than I would have liked. But I can always put a little pleat in it if I'm concerned about it and then sew that down. But it's on. It'll look fine on the wall. And if I don't like it, I can fix it. So that's what's going on with the charm quilt with the triangles for the charm challenge. Okay. Back to this quilt. So my mom died a couple of years ago. And when I went to her house to empty it out, she had several boxes that were wrapped gifts for people. And so there was one that had my name on it. And so it got put into a box. All of her stuff got put in my dining room. And I've been slowly over time working my way through it. Because there's art pieces, there's a bunch of other stuff. And with everything else going on in my life right now, that was low enough priority that it didn't need to be dealt with right away. So I opened up what was apparently going to be a Christmas present from my mother. This is it. The embroidery on the binding says that she made this in 1984 and 1985. The card that came with it said that she made it in purple because that was my favorite color. And she hoped that I would appreciate this when I went off to college, because this is an extra long twin size quilt. Which means it's been well over 30 years that it was under the bed in her guest room, waiting to be given to me. I just find this hysterical. Okay? Now, as a quilt goes, there are some serious issues with this. She used a satin stitch, which can do things like snag very easily on toenails or fingernails or whatever. The quilting is at about 3 stitches per inch, so it's not really holding the whole thing together. She had in her note, I don't know if I can, hold on, if I make it big you might be able to see it. No, you can't. Up at the very top, there are some great big stains. And it says in the note, I have no idea what stained this. I figured you can figure it out. So this has been sitting for over 30 years. With the stains, with the dog hair, with my mother's hair. All kinds of stuff on this. And no, this isn't my favorite style either. But you know what? This is exactly the kind of quilt that needs to have its story written down and passed along with the quilt. This quilt is going to go into my linen closet, which we're getting cleaned out right now. It will have its pride of place. I don't have a single bed it'll fit on, so it's going to be more of like a throw kind of a thing. It's too long to hang on the wall. It's actually longer than my ceiling is high. So it's not just an extra long twin. It's an extra, extra, extra long twin. So I find this incredibly fun. Okay? I look at it and I think, and I can think of how many hours it took her to embroider all of these by hand. You can tell that they're done by hand. And that she put in all that time. She didn't know how to finish, you know, in terms of making it a good, solid, washable quilt. This thing can never be washed. The batting in here is poor enough, and the stitching is so far apart that it'll just turn into little balls if I throw this in the machine. But this is just exactly the kind of thing where it's like, you know what? Sometimes you just have to laugh and enjoy it. But I'm going to keep it. It'll never be on a bed, but I'm going to keep it. And then when I pass away, my son can get rid of it if he doesn't like it. But that's okay. I won't know and I won't care. So it doesn't matter if what you do is perfect. It will be appreciated if you give it to the right person. So that's my quilt story for this session. Okay. Now, let's talk about the mystery quilt. Now, some of you wrote to me about the lap size instructions, and you said, Maria, it can't possibly be that much fabric. And I'm like, you know, you're right, but I did the math like 4 times. You know what I did? That 6 1/4 yards that I said that you needed was for the entire quilt. But I put it for both the focus fabric and the background fabric. So I have gone back in and I have redone the math on the round 1 and round 2. And I have included how much fabric you will need if instead of doing the 5-inch finished square, you want to do a 7 or a 9. If you want to go bigger, that's fine. I can do that math for you as well. But I thought a 9-inch square was going to be a pretty decent size for this particular pattern. So you now have updated instructions for the lap size, larger squared quilts. Okay, now the borders and bindings and all of that are going to be about the same measurement, so I didn't recalculate those. I just recalculated the middle. So that's all up there, and round 4 is up on the website. Because I was sick, and then Scott got sick, and John got sick, so the whole house was miserable, we had to delay all of the flooring work that's being done on the first floor. So I was almost done being ready when everything went downhill. So that's getting done. My carpeting is being done tomorrow, and then my kitchen and bath are being done on Friday. So it's all just still higgledy-piggledy for a whole extra week in my house. I have gotten about a quarter of the stuff from my sewing room put away. The rest of it's still in my guest room. I got some additional shelving to put on the wall over on this side. I've got 2 more shelves that I can put up. So I kept going back to Lowe's because I was getting the pre-cut melamine shelves, and they didn't have them a couple of times, but they did have them on Monday. So I swung by there on my way back from an assessment I was doing, and they had the 2. That was it. They only had 2, but they had what I needed. So I picked those up, and so those are ready to rock and roll for getting those shelves all set up. This over here is the section where I used to have the bookcase that wound up going into the guest room when I took the armoire full of books out. So it's been one of these washing machine events. And so with everything that's been going on, it's going to take me at least a month to get this set up the way I want it. At some point, if you're interested, let me know, and I will do an actual tour around during one of these where I take the camera around and I show you what everything is and where it is. But it's still one of those things. It's just it's going to take me at least 3 times longer than it should have because of how they did things when they came. So I'm glad to no longer be sick. I can't tell you how many boxes of tissues the 3 of us went through in those 10, 14 days. But that's okay. Donna, you're right. I can always do more quilting on this quilt. But I also know that because the thread is 30 years old that she put in here, and I can tell it wasn't a great thread to start with, I basically need to requilt the whole thing. So the question is am I going to take the time to do that? Probably not. Probably not. I could. And, someday I might. But it's going to be at least 10 years down the road before I do that. But that is a very valid point. You can always add more quilting. The only issue with that is if you are adding machine quilting, then you wind up in trouble when you get to the binding, unless you're replacing the binding as well. So that's something to keep in mind, that hand quilting, you can start and stop and it's not a problem. But machine quilting, if your binding isn't exactly the same on both sides, it doesn't finish as nicely as you might like. But you can make it work anyway. Okay, I've faked it many a time, so that's good. Now, round 4 of the mystery quilt. You're going to take the half square triangles that you made, and you're going to make 4 patches. But unlike usual, because it seems like most of the 4 patches that I see with half square triangles are pinwheel blocks, I want you to put them together like this. So this is what's on the website. Now, I was asked what size to trim the half square triangles down to, and as long as you're consistent in your sewing, this is not the time to trim, which sounds weird because I'm a definite trim girl. But if you happen to have a little bit of extra, that'll come in handy later, okay? So you're going to want your center to be good, and then if you can get your points to line up, the closer you get them, the better. Okay, so that's my tip for this time. And you're just going to put all of your blocks together into the 4 patches, okay, with the square centers. And so you have 3 weeks to do that, because our next visit is on April 5th. Okay? So the instructions, like I said, are up on the website. I did include how to spin the centers. If you don't know what I mean by that, let me switch cameras. And I don't know why it's so dark in here today. I've got all of the lamps on, and I replaced the 2 bulbs that burned out. Okay. When you put your 4 patches together, you can open this up just a little bit, and then you can lay these down in a circle, and that will reduce the bulk in the middle of your block, which makes it easier to stitch across. Now, if you're the type of person who likes to press your seams open, you're more than welcome to do that. Okay, these are just suggestions that I have, just like pressing to the dark. That's completely up to you. But whatever you do, make sure you do the same thing consistently. And if you're going to do it where you've pressed to the dark, if you spin those seams, it'll be easier when it comes time to quilt to put it together. Okay? So, you're going to sew things, your 2 patches together, and then your 4s. Make sure you're consistent with which way the flap fits when you put the two patches together. So, for example, here. If when you sew them together, this flap is always up on the right, then it should be up on every block. And what that'll do is it'll have your seam go up on one side. Let me switch this here to the other camera again. See here, it's pressed this direction, and then here it's pressed this direction because I spun that seam. But that means the next block, it's going to be up again, and then it'll be down again. So you'll be able to nest all of those blocks together really easily. Okay? So I hope that all makes sense. If there's any questions or problems or anything, you know how to reach me. You can write to me at mail@StashBlasterQuilts.com. You can leave a message or a comment on the page here. But that's the kind of thing where once you get used to doing it and spinning your centers, it becomes second nature. Because if you're always doing it the same way, they go together consistently time after time after time. And what's nice is that if you are going to do the basic block sewing, like I've talked about, because in the middle of the night, if I can't sleep, I put together 4 patches, I always sew them the same way. So no matter 6 months from now, if I decide to make a quilt using those, they're all going to be pressed ready to assemble with the seams opposing each other. So they'll nest in there automatically. So it just makes life easier when things just slide together without you having to think about it. Or where you don't have to start repressing because there's a few that are out of whack. Okay? So, I told you I was sick. And I was feeling rather brainless. And so I said, okay, I have drawers full of my blocks that I do in the middle of the night. Okay, in fact, I have got to start using up some of my half square triangles because I have 2 drawers here that are full. And based on what I just did, I have a lot more. So I have to come up with a design, which I'm going to show you how I'm doing. But my guild, the Springfield Quilters Unlimited, is doing farewell blocks. We have for years and years. They used to be 9 patches, and now what they're doing is a signature block. So I wasn't thinking very clearly when I did this. So I went to my 4.5-inch drawers, and I pulled out the all the creams and whites that I had that were pre-cut. And then I went to my 3-inch drawers, and I started just pulling out pairs. And I started getting ready to sew them together. Okay, hold on. Donna, you said, I am doing the smallest table topper. Do I use all 18? The smallest table topper has 9 blocks, so it will be 4 of the half square triangles in each block. Okay? Because you're going to finish, your center is going to be a 3x3 grid. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is what the block looks like. Here we go. And so one of the things that annoys me with a lot of quilt patterns is when you get the instructions, they say, okay, hold on, I'm switching cameras on you again. They say, okay, I want you to take your background, and I just grabbed a couple of pieces for this for demo today. Then you're going to put your square on here, you're going to sew on the diagonal, and then you cut this away. And then this winds up being garbage for a lot of people, or you're going to try later to go ahead and sew those together to use them another time. So that's not what I do. And I thought I would show you because I've had people ask me this a couple of times. So this is just a scrap piece of, this is a mailing from a dentist I don't know. Okay? So I follow the instructions, and the first thing they say to do is draw the diagonal line. So I take this, and I find my diagonal, and I draw my line. I'm trying to do this dark enough for you to see it, but not have it be so dark. Okay. Let me bring you down. Don't get it. Nobody gets motion sick, I hope. Okay. Now let me cover the QR code. Alright, and maybe if I turn this, there, maybe you can see this a little bit better. So here's my line. Okay? And that's all they say to do. But what I do is I go ahead and I draw a parallel line 1/2 inch away. So I put this 1/2 inch mark here right on the same diagonal, and I draw this line. Let me see if I can do this one a little darker here. I'll redo this one a little bit darker too to make it a little easier to see. There we go. Okay, so now you can see both lines. So here's the original line they told me to draw. Let me cover that QR code again. Sorry. I think that's part of why it's so fuzzy. And then I drew this one. Now why draw the second line? What I'm going to do is, first of all, I have to get my machine ready here. Unfortunately, because of the carpeting that went in here last time, my leaders and enders box is still in the sewing room across the way. So I don't have a leader to start with, but I'm going to use this instead. Okay, so I'm going to follow the instructions, and I'm going to move this up a little bit. There we go. Okay. I'm going to put this in the corner per instructed. Okay, just like that. And now I'm going to sew on this line. So let me... There we go. Okay, since I don't have a leader or ender, here's my threads. I'm going to drop my needle down. I'm going to line this up. Now the nice thing about this is a great thing to do when you're sick, because you don't even have to think about your 1/4 inch seam allowance or anything. You're just going to stitch right on that line. Okay, and then if I had another one ready, I would put it in. It's going to face the opposite direction, but that doesn't matter because I'm stitching on the line. I don't have to worry about which side of the foot it's on and is it the same 1/4 inch or anything like that. So, when I get to the end, and I don't know why that pulled, I'll have to check my machine a little bit later. This is where they tell you to cut this part away and throw it. But that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this... I have to get my threads back up, I'm sorry. Oh, no. That's why it pulled. Again, because of everything I've been doing, my machine was sitting on the floor, and the handle messed up the thread. So let me just re-thread this real quick. So this is what it's like in my sewing room, is that things never go quite as intended, or as smoothly as one would hope. But the way I look at it is you might as well see it, because it may happen to you too. Come on. I have a needle threader on this, but it doesn't work consistently. So I'm hoping I can just thread this real quick and not have to get weird about it. I have had to in the past get a regular old hand. Let me try trimming this. Hand needle threader and put it through my machine backwards and thread it that way. But this is my workhorse machine. This is the one that I use 99% of the time. So, alright, let me pull up my bobbin thread. Okay. So, I've sewn as much as I'm supposed to, but now I'm going to go ahead and sew the second seam here. Now what I did was I sewed the whole stack on that first seam line, and then I sewed the whole stack on the second one. Then I went ahead and I folded this back, and I put the other piece on that was already pre-marked, and I sewed the other side, both seams. So let me just trim these. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, instead of just cutting and throwing away, I'm going to cut these apart. It doesn't matter if you're exact, the seam is already sewn, right? So if you're not exactly on your 1/4 inch on your cut, it doesn't matter. This will get pressed open, just like this. And now I have a half square triangle that's already sewn, and I didn't have to mess with the bias. Okay? So now I'm all square again on my outer edges, and this is ready to go into another project. Here's the thing. I made 100 blocks. There is no need for 100 blocks. So I'm going to take them in, and I will sign some, but then there'll be a bunch of other blocks, and so if somebody is leaving, someone who hasn't made blocks can go ahead and sign some, and then the person who's leaving will have everybody's signature. So I don't feel bad about having made them, but I made 100. So that means I have 200 of these. Which is why, since my drawers are already full, I have to design something that's going to use up a bunch of half square triangles. Now the last time I did this, I did the red and white quilt that you've seen up and down. But while I did think about maybe doing another one of those, I decided instead to design something new, because that's one of the things that I enjoy doing. Now, I will often design on paper. I just, when I'm out and around, I have notebooks that have grid paper in them, as well as lined paper. When I was doing the charm quilt, I was doing all kinds of designs using 60-degree triangle paper. There's hexagon paper, and there's a lot of grid papers that you can print off on your computer. So, and they're free. So that's a nice way to get, a bunch of different sizes of different types of graph paper without having to invest in a large pack. But I do so much with squares and triangles and things like that that I have packs and packs of graph paper. So although I usually do it on graph paper, I also use something called EQ7, Electric Quilt 7. Now, I think they're on 8, 9, or 10 or something like that now. I'm way behind the curve on the EQ software. Partially that's because I do like to design on paper, and partially it's because I'm cheap, and as long as it does what I want it to do, I'm going to keep it. And, it's not... The additional functionality in the later versions, to me, is not worth what it would cost me to get the updated version. So, that's why I'm still on 7. But what I do on 7, you can do on any version that you have. You can also do it on any number of other projects, software programs. Now, I did not put together a PowerPoint. What I'm going to do is I'm going to point this camera that's over my desk at my computer screen, and that should work just fine. So, fingers crossed. So let's start by doing that. So again, try not to get seasick. Okay, so what you're looking at here is, oh wow, this is one of those cool iterations things. This is my software that I do to actually run the live stream. Okay, so hopefully this is coming out okay. EQ3. All right, so I can't see what you're seeing, so hopefully this is okay. I'm going to take one quick peek and see if I can see it here on this live stream page. Yeah, okay. So sorry about that. All right, so this is the quilt layout, but let's start by looking at the blocks. So when I go up here, this is my sketchbook, and so these are some blocks that I picked out to work with. Now, I picked these even though they're squares because I can always substitute in half square triangles, which is what I did here. Okay? So this is basically this block done with half square triangles instead of squares. So I started with this one, which is your basic 16 patch. I looked here at the single Irish chain, right? And I looked at this one, which is Road to California. And I said, okay, those are great starting places. So let's start with the Irish chain. What would it look like if I changed the squares to half square triangles? And then what would happen if I filled in some of the negative space with this? And the reason for the negative space is that when I looked at it here, this is very open. Now, if that's what I was going for, that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with it being open. But I thought it was a little too much. So I went ahead and added in those extra triangles. Now, I'm only using a limited palette of material colors here because I want to be able to see the design and not get lost in all the color. But when I do this, these are going to be all different. Okay, so don't get locked into how the pieces are lining up. But I did notice here that the way I had the blocks set up, here it's every other one, but when you put the blocks together, because here's the block, you wind up with a half and half. And I decided that even if they were different colors, if I was doing lights and darks, I didn't really care for how this turned out. Now here's where I took it again and I added some different coloring in how I set it up. And this is fine. There's nothing wrong with this. But on the last one, the blues were pointing out and the reds were pointing in. And I said, well, what happens if they all point the same direction, towards the center? And so I lost some of the interesting details I had on this one, where the intersections are. But I did get a very consistent light, dark, going around these. But did I like these triangles? No, not really. So then I said, okay, let's get rid of the centers and align them a little bit different so that everything points in. Do I still dislike the squares? Yeah, I do. So this is a no. So then I took the Road to California. Okay, and just to remind you, that's this one here. And at first I just replaced these where each 9 patch was a different color. And when I did that it was fine, but then I decided to flip these so that they would point the same direction. So you can see here all of these half square triangles are all pointed to the right. I thought that made for an interesting shape. I didn't know really how I felt about this blockiness, but I decided to keep playing with this pattern. So then I said, okay, what if I arranged the half square triangles to give me some diagonal motion? So you can see here, that these go up and across like this, okay? And you get that secondary thing, but these broken ones, they're kind of interesting and they kind of mirror these ones that point the other way, but I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Then I said, okay, here's a different way to arrange those. This is exactly the same pattern. This is the block here, right? It's just a question of how did I rotate the entire block. So here, I'll show you. If I rotate, oh, I'd have to edit it. Hold on. Let's pull this up. If I go ahead and rotate this block, you can see these two are exactly the same, and it's the Road to California block. But I liked how we got these really cool arrows going on here. So I said, that's kind of cool. So I liked that, and I said, okay, let's go from here. So I colored one block to see how it might look if it was colored. Would it get lost with all of these triangles? Because this is going to be a 6 by 6 in the middle. So this is a 36 block. Okay? But with enough color, I thought it looked kind of cool. But then I said, okay, let's go back here to the blocks. What if I narrow this down? So I started with, okay, let's just do 4 patches instead and leave the white. And then I added the same black and white half square triangles. And so then this is what it looks like. No, sorry, here it is with just the squares. So okay, that's okay. And here it is in the full setting. Lots of white again here on these diagonals. Alright, what if I rotate them? And this was kind of cool because they're not really squares, but not such a huge fan. So I went back because I was a little tired of that. And I went back to this one to see, okay, let's do the black and white with all color and see how it looked. And what if I changed the rotation on those blocks? That's kind of cool. And then I said, okay, go back to this one, put the half square triangles in. And what was interesting is this upper left corner here is dark. And it changes the pattern tremendously. Because we've got this pinky color here. Whoops. Pinky color here, which really shows. So you see this triangle a lot more strongly. But you kind of lose the triangle shape. It changes by having that dark color there. So as I went through and experimented with different layouts of this block, I came up with a bunch of different stuff, which was kind of fun. And then I hit on this. Now, I hold on here. I thought this was particularly kind of cool because of these dark blocks in here. It's more closed on this side and more open on this side. But because the white is against the white, it kind of mimics itself. When I change the color, which I can do, hold on, let me edit this. I can replace colors here. So if I took this dark blue here and I put in the yellow instead, you can see that now you really see the pinwheels, but you don't see the windows as much as you did the other way around. So if I put this back, it's a very different look, all because of the orientation of one color and whether it's a dark or a medium. So I really liked this one. I have a spin feature on this where it'll just rotate each block a quarter turn, and it came up with this, which I thought was kind of nice too, but I liked the other one better. And then this was a final layout. So these are all different designs that I did all on the computer so that I could see all the ways that it's going to lay out and make some decisions. So what I think I'm going to do with this giant stack of 200 from the signature blocks. And this doesn't look like much, but this is 200. Plus my drawers over here. I'm going to go ahead and do that one that had the interesting window. I just have to make sure I have it dark in that upper right corner. And it should all work out just fine. So this is going to be my next big sewing machine project that I'm going to work on together with you here. And so it's going to be a great way that I can use up some of my stash. And what's really neat is that all of these are the same size. I'm going to see what size they are, and then that's the size I'll trim down whatever in this drawer I decide to add. Excuse me. The nice thing about half square triangles is you can almost infinitely reduce the size. So if you start with a 18-inch half square triangle, you can keep cutting it down in size to a half an inch, and it'll still be a square half square triangle. So if these, well, let's see what these are. Okay, flip this over. All right, these are 2 1/4. So I can trim everything down to 2 1/4. I can decide to trim everything down to 2. But if I decided to go with 2 1/4, that would be perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'll probably go down to 2 because I know I've got a ton of 2s in here that wouldn't need to be trimmed then. And I can just go to town and put them wherever, however I want. And there's enough of them that it should make a significant reduction in my stash. So that's another thing that's going to be added in because now that the charm quilt's done, I don't have a machine sewing project to do here. So now you've seen how I've developed the next machine sewed project. So you'll get to watch that as it happens. And so that'll be starting in 3 weeks. I'll have my new floors I'll get to show you, and by then the charm quilt will be bound, and I don't know what's going to be going on with the hexagon quilt. This will be down. Okay, I hung it up for tonight, but it's going to be coming down because I don't want anything to happen to it. I still have the star that's basted to quilt, and a bunch of other stuff that's mid-project. So I'll be working on some of those for you as well. I think that most of the comments I've gotten are that you like seeing a bunch of different stuff kind of in process at the same time. I was asked by someone earlier today, how do I choose which project to work on? And the first question is there a due date? If there is, then the newest due date. You know, what's the thing that's going to come and bite me first if I don't get it done? But if there isn't anything with even a potential due date that I've put on it, I like to work on something that is closer to done so that it can come off of my tracker. I have a lot of stuff on my tracker. Not only because I track the quilts that I'm doing, like this one that I just showed you the designing of, but I also have commission quilts. I have the charity quilting that I do. I have a ton of partial projects, some of which I generated, and some other people gave me partially done things to do for charity. I do have another quilt that I'm going to be designing to use up more hexagons because I still have a box of hexagons up there. And so that one's going to be a modern design. So this one is a pictorial, which is a little bit more traditional. The next one's going to be modern. And so I'm going to lay out the hexes that I have to start. And then I'm going to see what else I need out of my 2-inch square, 2.5 inch squares. And I will plug in those spots and then go ahead and I will, at that point, just make those last hexagons that I need. And then that way I won't have a ton of them sitting around anymore. And that will be my next handworking project. Because like everything is finishing up all at once, which is kind of weird. So I really expected the hexi quilt to take closer to 1.5 years. And so with it being done in less than a year, I mean, a year to a year and a half just of the sewing. So I'm way ahead of schedule on it. So that's why it ran out early. And I did get at least one of the 4 or 5 conferences that I applied to. So I think it's the last week in August or the beginning of September. Plus there's one in September that I'm going to be attending. So I'm going to have a bunch of travel days and time at conferences. So I'd have to make sure that I have handwork ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get the modern one that I've started designing already, Hexie quilt, done, all the pieces numbered like I did last time, and ready to start doing the assembly work on. So the first conference that comes up, if I get it, would be in July. So now that it's March, April, May, June, July, that's 4 months from now, which means I have 2 months to finish my book and get it to the editor and then get it published and everything for that July one if I get it. And so that's not a lot of time that I'm going to have for the sewing. So that would be able to go on the trip with me. Unfortunately, the way they put it on their website for their call for speakers is that they'll let us know sometime in spring for a July conference in San Diego. So not only will I have to try to get the book done early because I won't know if I'm going before that would need to be done, right, for me to get it printed and take to that conference if I get it. And if I don't, that's fine. I have conferences in August and things that I'm also trying to get. But, so I have to get it done. But that's not going to give me much time to do things like get airplane, get hotels, get all of that stuff all sorted out. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but that's okay. I'll manage it either way. But on a plane or something, I definitely need something to concentrate on. And as long as it's not too bumpy, I can do some sewing on the plane. So I'll want to make sure that I'm prepared. So obviously I'm not going to quilt this thing. I'm not going to haul this thing around the country. But between the San Diego one in July and then Detroit in August, then I'll be coming back here, and then Boston in August, then back here, then Florida, then back here, then Boston. And all of the back here's are for like a couple of days. It's not long chunks of time. I want to make sure that I have plenty to do. So I think that when you come back in 3 weeks, that I will have started laying out the modern quilt as well. So you'll get to be able to watch that one as it happens. So, so that's what's going on. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about before we're done. I mentioned that the Springfield Guild is going to be doing another quilt camp in the summer, which will be our first time of doing summer camp. And so what I have arranged for is having an appraiser come one of the days to appraise people's quilts. So here's the thing. When you have a quilt, you might seriously want to consider having it appraised so that if the house burns down, if it gets lost when it's being shipped to somewhere for a show or something along those lines, if it gets lost, damaged, whatever, you've established its value. A quilt is worth more than a blanket, but an insurance company will count it as a blanket and they'll give you $20 for it. And you know how much time this stuff takes, right? Like I said, this has not been beautifully quilted. She tried really hard, and I'm 100% for it. But just because of the hand embroidery on it, it's going to be worth more than the $20. Okay? So you really should consider having it appraised. And there's 2 different ways that most appraisers work. They can give you a verbal appraisal, which means that they will tell you, yep, this quilt is worth approximately $50, $100, $1,000, $1,500, whatever it is. And I have had $50 appraised quilts. Okay, it cost me more to have it appraised than the quilt was worth, but it's because it was an old one, it was an antique one, and the materials were starting to degrade, and there were lots of reasons it was not a high value quilt. But since it was part of the inheritance, I had to get it appraised. You can get a verbal appraisal or you can get a written appraisal. The written appraisals are what you give to the insurance company, and that's how you'll get that money. The nice thing about the verbal one is that you can go ahead and say, okay, I'm splitting things up or I'm giving things away to family members, but I want to be equitable about it. I can tell them that I had it appraised. They're all about the same. Here you go. As long as they don't want to see the hard numbers. So by having the appraiser come, I'm going to be taking a bunch of mine, and hopefully a bunch of other people will take them, that they need appraised, and we can all go. She comes to one spot. It's a lot easier. But if you don't have something like that happening in a guild that you belong to, or if you don't belong to a guild, you can go to AQS, or you can go to, I'm blanking on it. The Association of Certified Appraisers, I think is what it is, and look specifically for quilt appraisers in your area. Or you can go to a guild or a quilt shop and ask who's a certified appraiser that they can recommend. So that you can take your things to them. They will look them over. They take photographs. They do all kinds of stuff. And then that way you know that you're covered. So I really recommend that if you belong to a guild, you might want to consider doing what I'm doing. And I'm going to just have a bunch of people sign up in time slots, and they can get their quilts appraised. Or you can just take your own. But you don't want to have something happen and be told that it's a blanket. It's not worth anything, because you know how much time and effort goes into it. So please consider having your quilts appraised. Always put a label on them. Okay, and that also helps with the appraisal, because they'll also take a photo of that, and then that's the proof that that's the quilt that got appraised. Okay, so please consider those. If you've enjoyed today, please go ahead and subscribe. If you hit the bell, you'll get notified that I'm coming live again, or if I've posted something. I don't post a lot right now. I'm hoping to do more, but I do start the live stream about 15 minutes before the start time, so that people can get their notification and then get to their machine comfortably, grab a drink, hit the bathroom, whatever you need to do first, and then be ready to stay with me for the hour. So if you hit the bell, it'll send you that notification. Otherwise, I'm here the first and third Wednesday of every month from 7 to 8 o'clock. And like I said, you can email me at mail@StashBlasterQuilts.com or leave comments in the chat. I finally figured out how to have the chat open and my streaming thing open, because there's a delay between the two. So it makes it kind of weird to be talking and then seeing yourself what you said a couple of minutes ago showing up on your screen. So I'm getting this down. I'm getting the tech down. And so thank you very much, those of you who have been patient with me from the beginning. But we're going to continue with the mystery quilt. Like I said, if you go to StashBlasterQuilts.com, under Annual Quilts 2023, you can see rounds 1 through 4. And round 4 is the one that we talked about today. Okay? And we will be done with the mystery quilt by the end of the year without you having to dedicate your life to it in order to get it done. So you can do everything from a 21-inch table topper up to the lap size. I always want to say laptop. I live with a techie, so it makes sense, but it's still weird. Up to the lap size. And as of today, you also have the alternate fabric requirements and directions for cutting for a 7-inch block and a 9-inch block. But this one here, in the original, this is going to finish it as a 5-inch block. Okay? So that's why the center of the 21 is 9. Okay? Because that's 3 across is 15. And then we've got 2 interior borders. And so that's going to bring us out to the rest of the distance. So I hope that all makes sense. And if you've got any questions, please go ahead and reach out to me. Thank you so much for joining me. I do love doing this, and you guys make it possible. I will see you in 3 weeks on April 5th, the first Wednesday of the month. Have a wonderful time. The whole family's feeling better now, so things are going to improve, and I'll be able to show you my downstairs floors when I see you in 3 weeks. Have a great night. Bye-bye.